What's good, y'all? CT signing in. So last week, the Washington football team put out a poll to gauge the interest of some possible new names for the franchise. Many names were given, but many of them fell flat. Like, why in the world would you want to be called a Wayfarer? The two most popular names thus far appear to be Red Wolves and Wild Hogs. My issue with Red Wolves is that it sounds too forced. Trying too hard to stay with the name that also starts with the letter R seems like a desperate attempt to hold on to the HTTR tagline that the organization has used for so many decades. Also, red wolves are an endangered subspecies that are mostly only seen in North Carolina. I've heard the argument that it shouldn't matter because there aren't any lions in Detroit or bears in Chicago. However, unlike lions and tigers and bears, oh my, red wolves are a very specific and niche animal. Therefore, it would make more sense to adopt their name in the state where they're actually located. The second name is Wild Hogs. I actually like this name a lot. It sounds deranged, tough, and well, wild. And for non-Washington football fans who are out of the loop, it was very common for Redskins fans to cosplay as pigs every Sunday at FedEx Field. However, if the goal is to truly move away from the Redskins' history of old, it makes little sense to pay homage to such a vassal tradition like this. Therefore, I came up with an even better name. A name that, number one, is historically based in the DC area, 2, provides a complete facelift from the team's controversial past, and 3, epitomizes the courageousness and determination that is requisite in rebuilding a once illustrious franchise that is ready for their return to glory. But first, theme music!
Ain't shit to me, it's a walk in the park. Y'all too smart, can't talk from the heart. I got sauce and it's all for the charts. It's all for the charts.
As possible names for Dan Snyder's team were weighed this past summer, Red Tails was an initially popular option that helped me stumble upon an even better namesake. Red Tails would honor the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of fighter pilots during World War II who were the first African American military aviators in the U.S. Armed Forces. During this time, Black Americans in many U.S. states were still subject to Jim Crow laws, and the American military was racially segregated, along with much of the federal government. The Tuskegee Airmen faced discrimination both within and outside the arm, and even had a movie made about them. While these soldiers deserve to be recognized, just like with the name Red Wolves, I believe the appropriate venue for that recognition would be the area they actually represented, in this case, Alabama. That's when I began reflecting on the segregation era and cycling through some of the most iconic civil rights protests. Like a Mike Tyson punch, the Freedom Riders hit me and I was instantly attached. The Freedom Riders were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into the segregated South of the U.S. during the year 1961 to challenge the non-enforcement of U.S. Supreme Court decisions in Morgan v. Virginia and Boynton v. Virginia, which ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. The southern states had ignored these rulings and the federal government did nothing to enforce them, so these brave men and women took action. The first Freedom Ride left none other than our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961. Just take a look at some of the fascinating details of the Freedom Riders that I watched in a short documentary.
By the late 19th century, segregation of blacks and whites had become an entrenched way of life in the South. In December 1960, another Supreme Court ruling declared segregated restrooms, restaurants, and waiting rooms for interstate bus, train, and plane passengers unconstitutional. 5 months later, that law would be severely tested by Freedom Riders. The Freedom Rides were organized by James Farmer, director of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, a civil rights organization rooted in the philosophy of nonviolence. Farmer, who would be arrested with other Freedom Riders, launched the movement to draw attention to the lack of enforcement of recent civil rights court decisions and legislation. Activist John Lewis, now a congressman from Georgia, was then a 21-year-old divinity student. He was the first of the Freedom Riders to be attacked when he and a fellow white rider tried to enter a whites-only waiting room at a Greyhound terminal in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Traveling deeper into the South, to Mississippi and Alabama, singing spirituals and freedom songs, the riders were met with hostility, arrest, and more violence. One of the most frightening attacks occurred a few miles outside Anniston, Alabama, on May 14, 1961. A Greyhound bus carrying Freedom Riders was forced off the road by a white mob who stoned and firebombed the bus. The passengers barely escaped the burning vehicle. That same day, Several of the Freedom Riders arriving at the Trailways bus depot in Birmingham suffered savage and bloody assaults. Among several beaten by the Ku Klux Klan was 61-year-old Walter Bergman, a college professor from Detroit. Undaunted, he urged others to join the cause and strike while the iron is hot. When black riders tried to enter a white waiting room, or white riders tried to use facilities designated for blacks, local police officers ordered them out. If the riders refused to leave, they were immediately arrested and charged with breach of peace. As the Freedom Riders were taken into custody in Jackson, they did not resist. Some bailed out of jail, but many, in a show of commitment to their cause, refused to be bailed out. The jail, no bail tactic, adopted by scores of those arrested, would burden Mississippi's penal system for months. Here's Martin Luther King, Jr.
Never in the history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity.
Civil rights leaders appealed to Washington. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had hoped for a quick end to the protests, and especially the violence. Finally, Kennedy pressured the Interstate Commerce Commission, the agency that regulated interstate travel, to issue a new and stronger ruling banning segregated facilities. The ruling went into effect on November 1st, 1961. It would still be many years before segregation would end completely, but the Freedom Riders had won a major battle in the war against racism.
So as you can see, these ladies and gentlemen were as brave as it gets. Refusing to post bail and risking death after being bombed, they remained steadfast in achieving their agenda and were able to accomplish it. This protest started and ended in Washington, D.C. Going from the name Redskins, which many were offended by, to Freedom Riders, which embodies social justice, would be a complete 180 for the organization. More importantly, this is the kind of positive press that the team needs as they chug along through their expedited rebuilding process. The heart and soul of Washington's team right now is their dominant defense, similar to how the Freedom Riders stood strong and defended themselves in the face of verbal and physical battery. DC is our nation's capital, meaning it is supposed to represent American values more than any other locale in the US. If this is truly the land of the free, is there anything more fitting than calling yourself freedom? Now, there are two arguments that I know people will make against this name. Number one is that the name is too long. To that I say, we could refer to ourselves as Freedom or the Riders. Most sports fans and media like use shortened monikers for a lot of teams anyways, such as referring to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as simply the Bucks, or the Washington Nationals as only the Nats. Number two is, what would the mascot be? Contrary to popular belief, there are several teams in the NFL and other professional sports leagues that do not have a designated mascot. And when you have a name with such powerful and historical significance behind it, like the Freedom Riders, a corny mascot almost cheapens the entire thing. I can already see it now. The remaining freedom fighters can make appearances at certain Washington games to be recognized for their heroic acts and give pep talks in the locker room to the players. What made this protest so unique to me was the racial unity. White and black human beings sitting side by side, willing to do whatever it takes to achieve equality for themselves and future generations to come. And in light of recent events with police brutality and the reemergence of hate groups, this is the perfect time to make a statement about what exactly Washington football will represent in their new 2020s era. So those are just my thoughts, but I want to know what you think. So let me know in the comments down below where you stand on the name Freedom Rider, as well as any other possible names that you would like to see come to fruition. Also, please check out my NFL investigation video into the Deshaun Watson sexual assault allegations. I worked my butt off on this video, but also really enjoyed making it. Show me some love if you can, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. This is CT, and I'm signing out.